The market was loud that morning. Stalls lined both sides of the narrow street, and the smell of bread and fish and wood smoke filled the air. People pushed past each other without looking up. Carts rolled over the stone path. Children ran between adult legs. Nobody paid attention to anyone else for more than a second. Lyra walked slowly through the crowd with her hood pulled low over her head. She kept her hands inside her sleeves and her eyes on the ground. Her horns were wrapped in cloth beneath the hood. Her tail was bound tight against her leg under her long skirt. She had learned long ago how to move through a human crowd without being noticed. Keep your head down. Do not let anyone see your eyes for too long. Do not speak unless you have to. She was looking for bread and maybe some dried herbs when she saw it. A brown leather wallet lying on the ground near a vegetable stall, half hidden under the edge of a wooden crate. People walked past it. One man nearly stepped on it. Nobody stopped. Lyra stopped. She looked around for a moment, then bent down and picked it up. She opened it carefully. There was some money inside, not a great amount but enough to matter. There was also a folded letter, worn soft at the edges from being opened and closed many times. And there was a small medal on a simple ribbon, the kind soldiers were given, dull with age but carefully kept. She did not take the money. She did not even think about it for long. It was not hers. That was the only thought in her head. It was not hers, so she would not keep it. She closed the wallet and looked around the market. Someone had lost this. Someone was going to notice it was gone and feel that cold sick feeling in their chest. She knew that feeling. She had lost things too, things that could not be replaced, and nobody had ever come back to return them. She started asking. It was not easy. Most people pulled away when she got too close. One woman looked at her hands where the skin was slightly too dark and the fingers slightly too long, and the woman stepped back without saying anything. A young man told her he had not lost anything and kept walking. A stall keeper shook his head without looking at her. Lyra did not stop asking. She moved through the market quietly and carefully, holding the wallet against her chest, describing it to anyone who would listen for more than 3 seconds. Most did not. But she kept going stall by stall, corner by corner, until she reached the far end of the market near the old fountain. There she found him. He was an old man sitting alone on a low stone step with his hands pressed flat on his knees. He was not moving. He was not looking at anything in particular. He had the look of a man going through every pocket in his mind, trying to remember where he had last seen something important. His name was Alfred. She did not know that yet. She walked up to him slowly and said, quietly, "Excuse me. Did you lose something today?" He looked up at her. His eyes were pale and tired, and there were deep lines around them. He looked at her the way old people sometimes do, like they are reading something written behind your face. "My wallet," he said. "I had it at the bread stall. I do not know where it went." Lyra held it out to him. Alfred stared at it for a moment without moving. Then he reached out and took it with both hands, holding it the way someone holds something they thought they would never see again. He opened it. He checked the letter. He checked the medal. His shoulders dropped, not in sadness but in relief, the kind that comes all at once and leaves you a little weak. He looked up at her. "Everything is inside," Lyra said simply. "I did not take anything." Alfred kept looking at her. There was something in his expression she could not quite name. It was not suspicion. It was not the usual careful distance people gave her. It was something quieter than that. "Why did you look for me?" he asked. "You could have walked away." Lyra thought about it for a moment. "It was not mine," she said. Alfred was quiet for a long time after that. Around them the market went on, loud and indifferent. But the two of them sat in a small pocket of stillness, and Alfred held his wallet with both hands, and looked at her like she had done something he had forgotten people were still capable of doing. Alfred did not want to go home just yet. He sat on the stone step for a little while longer, still holding the wallet in both hands. The market moved around him the way water moves around a rock, loud and busy and completely unaware of him. He looked at the wallet, then at the girl who had brought it back, and then he did something he had not done with a stranger in a very long time. He asked her to stay. "There is a small tea shop at the corner of this street," he said. "Would you sit with me for a little while? I would like to buy you something warm." Lyra looked at him carefully. She was not used to being invited anywhere. Usually people moved away from her, not toward her. But there was nothing sharp in the old man's face. No trick. No hidden edge. Just an old man who wanted company, and maybe wanted to say thank you in the only way he knew how. She said yes. The tea shop was small and warm inside. There were only 4 tables and a low ceiling with dark wooden beams. A fire burned in the corner. The woman behind the counter glanced at Lyra for a moment but said nothing, and Alfred ordered 2 cups without making a fuss about anything. They sat across from each other. For a moment neither of them spoke. Lyra wrapped both hands around her cup and felt the heat move through her fingers. Alfred set the wallet on the table between them and looked at it the way people sometimes look at something they love and are afraid of at the same time. Then he picked it up and took out the letter. He did not unfold it. He just held it and turned it slowly in his fingers. "My daughter wrote this," he said. Lyra did not say anything. She waited. "Her name was Agnes," Alfred said. "She was a good person. Better than me in most ways." He smiled a little when he said that, a small and tired smile. She cared about children who had nothing. She used to say that a child who cannot read is a child the world has already decided to forget. He set the letter down on the table and smoothed it with one hand even though it was still folded. "She saved money for years," he said. "Small amounts, whatever she could put aside. She wanted to open a school. Not a grand one. Just a room with some books and someone willing to sit with children and teach them the basics. Reading. Numbers. Enough to help them find their footing in the world." He stopped talking for a moment. He picked up his cup and held it without drinking from it. "She got sick before she could do it," he said quietly. "She gave me the letter before she went. She asked me to finish what she had started. She said she trusted me to do it." The fire in the corner made a soft sound. Outside, the market was still going, but in the tea shop everything felt very still. "I never did it," Alfred said. He did not say it with anger. He said it the way people say things they have carried for a long time, heavy and flat and worn smooth from being thought about too many times. "Every year I told myself I would start. Every year something stopped me. The grief. The not knowing how. The feeling that I would do it wrong and that would be worse somehow than not doing it at all." He shook his head slowly. "And then the years just kept going." Lyra looked at the letter on the table. "How long has it been?" she asked. 6 years, Alfred said. He finally drank from his cup. He set it down carefully and looked at her across the table. There was no embarrassment in his face, which surprised her. Most people, when they said something that honest, looked away. Alfred did not look away. "I do not know why I am telling you this," he said. "I have not told anyone in a long time." "Maybe because I gave something back to you today," Lyra said. "And now you are giving something back to me." Alfred looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, like that made sense to him in a way he had not expected but could not argue with. They sat together in the small warm shop for a long time after that. Alfred talked and Lyra listened, and she listened the way very few people ever do, without waiting for her turn to speak, without looking around the room, without making it about herself. Just listening. And Alfred, for the first time in 6 long years, felt the weight shift just slightly off his chest, the way it does when someone finally, truly hears you. Lyra came back the next morning before the sun was fully up. She stood outside Alfred's door and knocked twice, not too loud, not too soft. She did not know exactly why she had come back. She had told herself the night before that she would not. She had a small room she rented above a candle shop 2 streets away, and she had enough problems of her own without carrying someone else's. But she had lain awake thinking about the letter. About Agnes. About 6 years of a tin box sitting somewhere untouched while an old man carried his guilt alone. She knocked again. Alfred opened the door. He was already dressed, which told her he had not slept much either. He looked at her for a moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider without saying anything. That was enough. Inside, his house was small and very clean. Everything had a place. Everything was neat in the way that lonely people keep things neat, because order is something you can control when everything else has already slipped away. There was a single chair by the window with a blanket folded over the arm, and Lyra could see it was the chair he sat in most, because the cushion was worn flat in the middle. "I thought about what you said," Alfred told her. "About the tin box. Do you know where it is?" Lyra asked. He nodded slowly. "Agnes told me before she went. She said it was under the floorboards near the back wall of the bedroom. I never went to look." "Can we look now?" Lyra asked. Alfred was quiet for a moment. He rubbed one hand over his face and breathed out slowly through his nose. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the house, and Lyra followed. The bedroom was as neat as the rest of the house. The bed was made tight and flat. There were no personal things left out except a small drawing pinned to the wall above the window, a simple sketch of a bird done in pencil, slightly crooked, clearly drawn by a child or someone who had not drawn much but had tried their best. Alfred crouched down near the back wall and pressed his hand against the floorboards one by one until one of them shifted slightly under his fingers. He worked it loose carefully and set it aside. Beneath it, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, was a tin box about the size of a thick book. He picked it up and held it for a long moment without opening it. Then he handed it to Lyra. She opened it gently. Inside was a roll of coins tied with a thin piece of string, several folded notes held together, and a small piece of paper with numbers written on it in neat handwriting, a careful record of every amount Agnes had set aside over the years, dated and totaled at the bottom. The total was more than either of them had expected. Alfred stared at the paper for a long time. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the particular pain of finding out that someone you lost had worked harder than you ever knew. "She never told me how much," he said quietly. "She trusted you to use it well," Lyra said. Alfred closed his eyes for just a second. Then he straightened up, set his shoulders, and said, "Show me the building." There was an empty building at the edge of town that had once been a storage room for a grain merchant who had moved away 3 winters ago. The door hung at an angle. The windows were thick with dust. Dead leaves had blown in through a gap in the corner and piled up along the walls. But the roof was solid and the floor was good stone, and the space inside was bigger than it looked from outside. They worked through the morning without stopping. Alfred swept while Lyra pulled the broken shelving away from the walls and stacked it outside. They propped the door back on its hinges using a flat stone wedged under the frame. Lyra found a bucket at the back of the room and used water from the street pump to wash down the windows until the light came through clean and clear. Alfred did not ask how she carried the heavy shelves so easily. He simply worked beside her, and that was enough. By midday the room was empty and clean and full of light. They stood in the middle of it and looked around. It still needed tables and chairs and books. It still needed a great deal. But it did not feel like a forgotten room anymore. It felt like a beginning. That was when Edith appeared. She came through the open doorway slowly, one hand on the doorframe, a small girl of about 7 with bare feet and a pale face and dark circles under her eyes that had no business being on a child that young. She wore a dress that was slightly too big for her and she had a cough that rattled loosely in her chest when she breathed. She looked at Alfred. Then she looked at Lyra. Most children looked at Lyra the way adults did, with that quick pulling back, that careful measuring of how strange she seemed and how much distance to put between them. But Edith did not do that. She looked at Lyra the way children sometimes look at something they find simply interesting, open and direct and completely without fear. She walked across the room and sat down on the floor beside Lyra without asking permission or saying a word. Lyra looked down at her. Edith looked up at her. "Are you going to teach here?" the girl asked. "We are going to try," Lyra said. Edith nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Then she leaned her small back against the wall and looked around the empty room with her hands folded in her lap, quiet and patient, as if she had simply decided this was where she was going to be and that was that. Alfred watched from across the room. He did not speak. He just looked at the small girl sitting calmly beside Lyra in the clean light of the empty room, and something moved across his face, not quite a smile but close to one, the kind of expression that only comes when something you had stopped believing in begins, very quietly, to feel possible again. The knock came late at night. Alfred was almost asleep in his chair by the window when he heard it, 3 hard knocks on his door, fast and urgent. He opened it to find a woman standing in the dark with her shawl pulled tight and her face drawn with worry. She was Edith's mother, a thin woman named Doris who worked at the laundry on the far side of town. "The girl is very bad," Doris said. "The fever came on fast. I do not know what to do." Alfred pulled on his coat and came with her. Edith's home was a single room above a narrow staircase, small and cold with one window and a straw mattress on the floor. The girl was lying on the mattress with a blanket pulled up to her chin, and even from the doorway Alfred could see how wrong she looked. Her face was flushed deep red. Her eyes were half open and seeing nothing. Her breathing was fast and shallow, each breath catching slightly at the top like something was sitting on her chest. Alfred sent Doris for the town healer and stayed with the child. The healer came within the hour. He was an old man named Will who had practiced in the town for 30 years and knew his business well enough. He knelt beside Edith and checked her pulse and her breathing and pressed his hand to her forehead and her throat. He asked Doris a few questions about when the fever had started and whether the girl had eaten anything unusual. Then he stood up. He looked at Doris and shook his head slowly. "The fever is too deep," he said quietly. "I have nothing that will reach it in time. Keep her warm. Give her water if she will take it." He picked up his bag. "I am sorry." He left. Doris stood in the middle of the room with her hands pressed over her mouth. Alfred stood beside her and did not know what to say because there was nothing to say. The candle on the floor threw weak light across Edith's small face and the sound of her breathing filled the room like something that did not belong there. Alfred thought of Lyra. He did not stop to think about whether it was a good idea. He simply went. Lyra opened her door before he finished knocking. She looked at his face and did not ask questions. She took her bag from the hook on the wall and followed him out into the dark street without a word. When she walked into the room and saw Edith, she went still for just a moment. Then she set her bag down and knelt beside the child and placed one hand very gently on the girl's forehead. She closed her eyes. She stayed like that for a long moment, breathing slowly, reading something that only she could feel. Then she opened her bag. What she took out did not look like much. Small bundles of dried things tied with thread. A flat stone. A folded cloth. A small clay bowl. Doris watched from the corner with red eyes and Alfred stood near the door and neither of them spoke because something about the way Lyra moved made speech feel wrong, like talking in a room where someone is praying. Lyra worked quietly and carefully through the night. She ground things on the flat stone and mixed them in the clay bowl with a small amount of water. She warmed the cloth and laid it across Edith's chest. She lifted the girl's head gently and helped her take small sips of the mixture she had made, patient and slow, again and again through the dark hours. She spoke to Edith sometimes in a low voice, not words exactly, more like sound, steady and calm, the way you talk to something frightened to let it know you are there. Her hands never shook. Around the third hour of the night Doris fell asleep sitting against the wall from exhaustion. Alfred stayed awake. He watched Lyra work and said nothing. Once, in the very deep part of the night, Lyra's hood slipped back slightly and the candlelight caught the edge of one of her horns and the dark scaled patch along the side of her neck. Alfred saw it clearly. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply looked and then looked back at Edith and stayed where he was. Just before dawn the girl's breathing changed. It slowed. It deepened. The catching at the top of each breath smoothed out and disappeared. The red flush across Edith's face softened and faded. Lyra pressed her hand once more to the girl's forehead and this time when she lifted it away she sat back on her heels and let out a long quiet breath of her own. The fever had broken. Doris woke a few minutes later and saw her daughter's face and made a sound that was not quite a word, something between a sob and a gasp, and she crossed the room and gathered the girl into her arms and held her. By the time the sun came up, people had begun to gather outside. Word had moved through the town the way word always does in small places, quietly and quickly and touching everyone. They stood in the street below the window, 6 people at first, then a dozen, then more. Some had come out of concern for Edith. Others had come because they had heard something strange was happening and they wanted to see for themselves. Lyra came out of the building slowly, her bag over one shoulder, her hood down. She did not try to hide anything. She was too tired for that. She stood in the morning light with her dark eyes and her bound horns visible beneath the loose cloth and the faint scale pattern at her throat catching the early sun. The crowd was very quiet. Some faces were hard. Some were uncertain. A few people at the back had already taken a step away. Nobody spoke first. Then Alfred stepped forward. He came and stood beside Lyra in front of everyone, an old man with a worn coat and a steady face, and he looked out at the crowd without any hesitation and said it plainly and without decoration. She stayed through the whole night. She did not sleep. She did not leave. She used what she knew and she brought that child's fever down when Will had already walked away. He paused for just a moment. She is a healer, and she is good. Nobody cheered. Nobody rushed forward. But nobody moved away either. The crowd stood in the quiet morning air and looked at Lyra, and Lyra stood beside Alfred and looked back at them, and the silence that passed between them was not the silence of fear or anger but something slower and more careful than that. Something that was not yet trust, but was no longer nothing. The morning the school opened, the sky was clear and pale blue and the air smelled like cold grass and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Alfred was up before sunrise. He swept the stone floor of the building even though it was already clean. He arranged the 3 small benches they had found and the 2 low tables someone from the market had donated after hearing what the building was going to be used for. He set the candles straight and checked the window latches and moved a bench 2 inches to the left and then moved it back again. He was nervous in the way that people get nervous about things that matter deeply, not because they are afraid it will go wrong but because they care too much about it going right. Lyra arrived just as the sun came fully over the rooftops. She carried a bundle of dried herbs under one arm and a small stack of smooth writing boards that she had sanded flat herself over the past 2 evenings. She wore no hood. Her horns were not wrapped. The scale pattern along her throat and the backs of her hands was visible in the morning light, dark and quiet, simply part of her. She had decided the night before that she was done hiding inside a place that was supposed to belong to everyone. Alfred saw her come in and nodded once. She nodded back and set her things down and helped him carry the last bench into place. The children began arriving shortly after. They came in 1s and 2s, some holding a parent's hand, some alone, some running ahead of whoever had brought them and skidding to a stop in the doorway to look inside with wide curious eyes. There were 9 children in total by the time the morning had fully settled. Some Lyra recognized from the market. Edith was there, sitting in the front with her hands folded and her color fully back in her cheeks, bright and solid and healthy. When she saw Lyra, she smiled the way children smile when they see someone they have already decided they trust completely. Lyra sat down on a low stool near the front and Edith immediately shifted her bench 2 inches closer. Alfred stood at the front of the room and looked out at the children and the few parents who had stayed to watch along the back wall. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who made speeches and everyone in the room could see that, but they waited for him because there was something in his stillness that made people want to give him time. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the wallet. From the wallet he took the letter, old and soft at the folds, the paper slightly yellow at the edges from years of being kept close. He unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something that cannot be replaced. He smoothed it once with the flat of his hand and looked at it for just a moment before he looked up at the children. Then he began to read. Agnes had not written a long letter. It was simple and direct the way she had apparently been in everything she did. She wrote that she believed every child deserved a place to learn, not because learning made you important or wealthy but because it made you able to understand the world around you and your place in it. She wrote that she had saved what she could and she trusted her father to do what she could not finish. She wrote that the school did not need to be grand. It only needed to be honest and open and willing. She ended the letter with 4 words. It is worth doing. Alfred folded the letter slowly when he finished. The room was very quiet. One of the younger children had leaned against the child beside her and was looking at Alfred with serious eyes. Edith was looking at the floor with her lips pressed together the way children do when they are feeling something large and do not have words for it yet. Alfred put the letter back inside the wallet. Then he walked across the front of the room to where Lyra sat and he held the wallet out to her with both hands. Lyra looked up at him. Keep it, Alfred said quietly. So you remember you were the one who made this possible. Lyra took it with her clawed hands, both of them, not hiding them, not pulling her sleeves down over them. She held the wallet against her chest and felt the worn leather warm under her fingers. She looked out at the children in front of her. Edith was watching her with that same open unafraid face, the same look she had given her the very first day she wandered into the empty building and sat down beside her without asking permission. The other children were watching too, curious and quiet and waiting, the way children wait when they sense something important is happening even if they cannot name what it is. Lyra breathed in slowly. She had lived in this town for almost a year, moving carefully through its streets with her hood pulled low, keeping to herself, taking up as little space as possible. She had spent so long trying not to be seen that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply exist somewhere without apology. She looked at the room around her. The clean floor. The morning light through the washed windows. The benches full of children who had come because someone had believed it was worth doing. She held the wallet a little closer. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Lyra did not feel like something passing through. She did not feel like a stranger waiting to be told to leave or a creature pretending to belong somewhere she did not. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be.